There are stories buried so deep in history they were never meant to be unearthed. This is one of them. In the still heat of a Missouri summer, 1867, a physician opened a journal and began writing something he dared not speak aloud. His pen shook, not from age, but from knowing what he had seen, what he had felt, would never leave him. He documented a boy, a child no one could explain, no wound, no trauma, no violence. And yet, death followed him like a shadow sewn to his soul. Timothy Caldwell, 8 years old, blue eyes that never blinked long enough to dream. He arrived with nothing but a bag of clothes and a silence that devoured rooms. Within 6 months of his arrival, 11 people were dead. Farm animals perished without cause. Adults whispered behind closed doors. And every time, he was near Dot. But this is not a story about a cursed child. No. It's about what hides beneath the surface of a mind that looks back at you and sees parts, moving pieces, weakness, opportunity. Timothy didn't throw tantrums. He didn't lie. He didn't disobey. He watched. And when people died, he observed like a scientist, not a mourner. This video isn't entertainment. It's a descent into something our ancestors feared, our institutions silenced, and science still can't explain. You found this for a reason. That reason is buried in the story of Timothy Caldwell. And by the end, you won't just question what he was, you'll question how many walk among us. Unseen. Shall we begin? The official record says Timothy was taken in by his uncle, Thomas Caldwell, a man hardened by war, debt, and failure. The boy arrived at the farmhouse with neatly folded clothes, a blank face, and eyes that didn't seem to register emotion. Most orphans cry. They ask questions. They resist. Timothy did none of that. He nodded once, said, "Yes, sir," and stepped inside like he had already lived there 1,000 times. But what the record doesn't say is what happened before. Witnesses recall a neighbor who housed Timothy briefly after his mother died of consumption. She claimed the boy never slept. She'd wake in the middle of the night to find him sitting upright, hands folded in his lap, staring at her bedroom door. When she asked what he was doing, he'd simply whisper, "Listening." 2 weeks later, she sent him away, pale and shaking. At the Caldwell farm, he became something else. Something tireless, something obedient. He never played, he never cried. He completed adult tasks with unnatural precision. When scolded, he showed no resentment, just quiet acceptance. It was like punishment meant nothing to him, like emotions were something he'd read about, not something he felt. The local doctor, Samuel Harding, took notice. In Timothy's presence, he felt what he'd only felt near dying soldiers, a pressure behind the eyes, a stillness, as if something in the room was calculating every weakness. He would later write, "The boy had the eyes of a surgeon, but not the heart of one." The first death came on a summer afternoon that smelled of hay and river mud. Mary Fletcher was 5, too young to fear water, too curious to stay near home. Her laughter had echoed through the willow trees that morning. By dusk, she was face down in 12 inches of creek water, limbs slack, eyes wide, dress caught on a submerged root. It was Timothy who found her. He appeared at the Fletcher doorstep just before sundown, clothes damp, voice calm. "She's not breathing," he said. "No panic, no tears, just information." The townsfolk praised his courage, called him a blessing. But Dr. Harding, he noticed the details. The boy described the exact position of her body, the way her arm was bent behind her back, the color of the water as it swirled around her face. Not with the fumbling horror of a child who stumbled into tragedy, but with the precision of someone who'd been watching it happen. When questioned, Timothy said he was looking for a missing calf. Convenient. Always convenient. And yet, he stood at the funeral, small hands folded, gaze lowered, expression solemn, a model of grief. But Mrs. Patterson, watching from across the aisle, saw something that would haunt her sleep for months. Timothy's eyes were dry, too still. And when no one was looking, they were scanning, memorizing. It wasn't mourning. It was recording. Something ancient stirred behind that child's face. And no one, not yet, understood what they had welcomed into their town. Three weeks later, it happened again. Henrik Len, the old Norwegian logger, was found at the base of Devil's Bluff, neck snapped like a dry twig, limbs twisted grotesquely on the rocks below. He was 73, brittle from arthritis, but no fool. The man had climbed those bluffs for years to tend his wild beehives. He knew every stone, every ledge. And yet, he fell. Timothy found the body. Again. He was walking back from town, he said. Spotted Mr. Len's hat snagged in a thorn bush. Called out. No answer, so he climbed down, and there he was. Broken. Swarmed with dead bees. Dr. Harding examined the scene. It didn't make sense. The hives at the top hadn't been disturbed. No signs of attack, no agitated colonies, but around the body, dozens of bees, lifeless and scattered, like they'd been drawn there, like something had pulled them to the place of death. Timothy offered a theory. Maybe Henrik was stung and fell. He said it softly with concern, but his eyes held no fear. Just that same clinical distance, like a scientist watching a failed experiment. Harding began to feel it in his bones. This was not coincidence. This was pattern. And patterns mean intention. But the boy remained untouched by blame. In fact, the community called him helpful. Lucky that he was there twice now when death arrived. But luck runs out. Patterns hold. And the moment you see the pattern, you can never unsee what's really at work. They buried Henrik under a grey sky. Rain fell in sheets. The preacher's voice cracked over the thunder, but Timothy stood dry-eyed beneath a black umbrella borrowed from the church vestibule. Dr. Harding watched him from a distance, noticed how the boy wasn't looking at the coffin. He was watching the mourners, studying them. Measuring. That was when Harding remembered something from his early years, treating shell-shocked soldiers, men who had seen too much death, too close. They developed a look, a stillness that wasn't calm but calculating, like something inside them had shifted, quietly, permanently. Timothy had that look. But he was 8. Then came the third. Jacob Mills, age 6, vanished while chasing frogs in the woods behind his family's cabin. The search party combed the area for days. Dogs, torches, men with rifles, nothing. Until the fourth morning. Timothy arrived at dawn. "I think I heard crying," he said, "near an old well." They followed him, through thick brush, over tangled roots, straight to a forgotten shaft, hidden beneath fallen logs. Jacob was inside, barely alive. He died that evening. Dr. Harding didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk, a single lantern casting long shadows across pages of notes, names, dates, patterns, 3 deaths, 1 near death, all within walking distance of the Caldwell farm, all with Timothy at the center. Coincidence or camouflage? Harding had seen killers before, young ones too, but Timothy was different, not reckless, not impulsive, systematic. He didn't lash out. He observed, waited, and inserted himself just enough to be seen as helpful. It was genius, and it was monstrous. So Harding began watching. He scheduled more visits to neighboring farms under the guise of routine checkups. What he found sent a chill through his bones. Animals were dying, quietly, unnaturally. A chicken here, a calf there. A pig found with its leg broken in the pen. No sign of struggle, no predator tracks, just dead, with precision. As if someone understood exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly where to strike. And always, always, Timothy had a reason to be nearby. Mrs. Patterson told Harding she'd seen the boy walking along her fence line 2 mornings before her rooster was found with its spine snapped. Timothy Caldwell wasn't just unusual. He was organized. By November of 1866, Dr. Harding had taken to riding out to the Caldwell property under false pretenses, bringing medicine, fabricated letters, supplies no one had ordered. He needed time, eyes on the boy, proximity to the pattern. One morning, Sarah Caldwell had gone to town. Thomas was in the north field mending a fence. Timothy was alone. Harding found him in the barn, seated on a bale of hay, methodically carving into a block of wood. At first glance, it looked like a child's toy, a horse perhaps, but the angles were wrong, too angular, too precise. The figure had no eyes, only deep hollow sockets, and limbs jointed like a puppet. Timothy didn't flinch when Harding entered. He didn't even look up. "I'm studying balance," he said. "How things stand, how they fall." His tone was flat, emotionless. The barn smelled of sawdust and something else, something metallic. Harding's gaze drifted to a table near the back. Pinned to the wood with iron nails were 3 dead rats, each carefully dissected. Not mutilated, dissected, their anatomy exposed with surgical precision, veins separated, organs arranged, labels carved in the wood beside them. Timothy followed Harding's eyes. "I read one of your books," he said. "The one about battlefield injuries." He smiled. Not with joy, with pride. The strange events on the Caldwell farm were no longer isolated. They were escalating. In early December, Reverend Blackwood's youngest son, a boy of 11, fell ill after drinking water from the church's well. Within hours, he was dead. Poison. No doubt. The water was found to contain white arsenic, a substance rarely seen in rural Missouri, unless you knew where to look. 1 week later, 2 cows on the Patterson farm turned up dead, stomachs ruptured from within. When their bodies were cut open, their organs showed signs of systematic feeding, not by wolves, not by disease, by tools, blades. Dr. Harding, now fully convinced something was operating beneath the surface, began comparing notes. Each incident, every death, every mutilated animal, every anomaly, had a silent observer in common, Timothy Caldwell, sometimes present at the scene, sometimes seen in the area just before or just after, but always close, always watching. Harding mapped it out on his study wall, pins and string, red ink, circles, connections, and when he stepped back, he saw it. A pattern. It wasn't just proximity, it was design. Each event formed a kind of geometry across the farmland, like points in a ritual diagram. The deaths, the illnesses, the sabotaged wells and fences, they aligned. This wasn't chaos. It was orchestration. The boy wasn't reacting to the world. He was shaping it. And the more Dr. Harding observed, the more one terrifying question echoed through his mind. What happens when he's done preparing? Because this everything so far might just be the opening movement. Dr. Harding couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pattern, the deaths, the geometry, the deliberate silence in Timothy's eyes. Something far older than a child was at work here, he was certain of it now. So he dug deeper. Not into medicine, but into myth. He remembered a lecture from medical school, half dismissed at the time. A professor speaking of ancient belief systems, pre-Christian remnants buried in rural traditions, symbols older than Rome, archetypes older than Adam. The empty child, they called it, a figure that appears in folklore across continents, always described as small, blonde, blue-eyed, and unaging. Sometimes a blessing, often a curse, always a test. In old Scottish myths, the child comes to a village during times of despair, offering hope, help, even healing. But those who accept it never thrive. Their crops wither, their livestock vanish. One by one, the villagers die off, until only the child remains. Sound familiar? Harding found nearly identical tales in Finnish, Slavic, and even Cherokee oral traditions. A boy arriving after tragedy, bringing misfortune cloaked in innocence, and always, always vanishing before the community fully collapses. The boy wasn't Timothy. He was wearing Timothy, or what was left of him. What Harding once thought was psychological detachment might be something worse. Possession, or worse than possession, conscious displacement. The thing in Timothy Caldwell wasn't pretending to be human, it was studying us, and the test had already begun. The child wasn't killing, not randomly, not out of cruelty. It was conducting a sequence. Dr. Harding began matching the deaths, not just by time or location, but by symbol. Mary Fletcher drowned on Lammas Eve, the old pagan festival of first harvest sacrifice. Henrik Len fell near the equinox, when veil-thin moments demanded offerings to the earth. Jacob Mills died during Michaelmas, a date once associated with the weighing of souls. It wasn't superstition, it was schedule. And in each case, the child's presence wasn't accidental. It was required. He began to sketch it against his better judgment. A map, a ritual circle. The 3 deaths, evenly spaced across the county, formed a perfect triangle. At the center, the Caldwell farm. The 4th point was due soon. That's when he found something else, a drawing, folded between pages of Timothy's Bible during a checkup visit. It wasn't a child's doodle, it was a glyph, an ancient, looping knot of spirals and blades, identical to a carving Harding had seen in a pre-Columbian mound in Illinois years ago, except this one was drawn upside down. That night, Harding wrote in his journal, "He is not just the knife, he is also the altar." And as he stared at the lines, one phrase burned into his skull like a whispered command from behind the veil. He remembers forward. This wasn't about death. It was about becoming. What does it mean when a child remembers forward? Harding asked himself that again and again. It wasn't just the strange drawings. It wasn't the ritual spacing of the deaths. It was how Timothy spoke. He didn't talk like a boy trying to make sense of the world. He spoke like someone who had already seen it end. The past didn't interest him. But the future? He asked questions no child would think to ask. What happens if all the water runs dry? If the stars stopped moving, how long before we noticed? Could a person live forever if they forgot how to die? Harding began noticing subtle shifts in his own perception around the child. Time stretched near him. Thoughts he'd never had slipped into his mind. Not as ideas, but memories. Once, while checking Sarah Caldwell's lungs for signs of illness, Harding looked out the farmhouse window, and for a moment, just a breath of time, the sun appeared frozen in the sky. Not still. Frozen, like a painting behind glass. No birds, no wind, no sound. Then Timothy spoke. "Sometimes it stops," he said flatly. "But it always comes back." Harding didn't respond. He couldn't. He was staring at Timothy's shadow. It was pointing in the wrong direction, and it wasn't his first time seeing that. He just didn't remember until now. Dr. Harding began locking his doors. Not out of fear of Timothy, but of thoughts that were no longer his own. He started dreaming in languages he didn't speak, saw symbols in the bark of trees, woke with his hands covered in dirt, though his bed was clean. Once he found a single feather on his pillow, singed black at the edge. He lived alone. Something was opening. The medical journals he once filled with tidy Latin notes now trailed into spirals, glyphs, and mirrored handwriting he didn't remember writing. In one entry, dated November 3rd, he scrawled just 3 words. He knows time. That same night, Harding broke into the Caldwell barn. Not to accuse, to witness. Inside, he found something the community would never see. A hidden corner beneath the hay, arranged like an altar. Bones, small, bird-like, a circle of melted candles, scratched into the floor with perfect symmetry, was a sigil he'd never seen, but somehow recognized. He felt nauseous. Not from fear, but from the deep, soul-rattling certainty that he'd seen this exact symbol before, not in a book, not in a dream, but in the trenches of Gettysburg, carved into the chest of a corpse that hadn't bled. He stumbled backward, and Timothy was behind him, smiling, calm, not a child, not quite. "You're almost ready," the boy whispered. Then he added, but don't look too far in." Harding asked, "Why?" The boy's eyes narrowed. "Because something might look back." Dr. Harding didn't sleep after that. Not because of fear, because of clarity. He spent 3 nights in his study, rereading medical texts, battlefield logs, occult treatises, anything that could explain the patterns now screaming in plain sight. Timothy Caldwell wasn't the first. There were others, hidden across time, children who survived fires without a burn, infants who spoke dead languages, young boys found standing over corpses they couldn't have killed, but who smiled when no one was looking. Every one of them adopted. Everyone appearing in the wake of war, famine, or national trauma. Always when a population was vulnerable, distracted. They weren't accidents, they were insertions. Harding remembered something Timothy had said weeks before, so casual it had slipped by at the time. "I wasn't born, I was sent." Sent by who? And for what? That question began to spread in Harding's mind like infection. What if the world wasn't shaped by kings or nations or religions, but by these agents? Not demons, not aliens, not ghosts, but something older. Something that harvests human trauma. Something that feeds on patterns, war, grief, confusion, to slip its hands into the machine of history. Timothy Caldwell wasn't the danger. The Sedalia sheriff filed no reports. The town council refused Harding's letters. And the local church asked him, politely, to stop disrupting peace with suspicion. But it wasn't fear that silenced them. It was familiarity. The town had seen this before. They just didn't want to remember. Harding spoke to Reverend Garrison, an old man whose sermons had once moved war widows to tears. Garrison listened in silence as Harding laid out everything. The deaths, the animal mutilations, Timothy's expressionless presence in it all. When Harding finished, the old man stood slowly and walked to a dusty bookshelf. He pulled out a thin, blackened diary, older than the church itself. "You're not the first doctor to come asking about children who don't feel," he whispered. "We had one in 1813, and another, I'm told, before the Louisiana Purchase." Harding's hands shook as he opened the diary. The entries weren't medical. They were observations. Descriptions of children with blank stares and precise hands. Of towns gripped by invisible dread. Of rituals too fractured to follow, but always surrounding an arrival. These weren't just strange boys. They were instruments. Not killers, not prophets, but measurements, tools for an intelligence mapping human fear, and perfecting it. And no one wanted to face it. Not the church, not the law, not the people. Because once you see it, you can't go back. Just like you now. You're in this. And the thing behind Timothy, it knows your name now. Timothy Caldwell didn't vanish. He didn't die. He was removed. 1 week after Harding's final conversation with Reverend Garrison, a man arrived from St. Louis. He claimed to be from the State Medical Review, though no such office existed. No badge, no papers, but authority rolled off him like smoke. He had Harding's journals in hand before sunset. The next morning, Timothy was gone. No goodbyes, no explanations, just an empty bed and boot prints leading to the tree line, followed by nothing. And that should have been the end. But Harding didn't stop. He left Sedalia. He followed the trail of records, sealed birth certificates, property transfers, orphanage closures, all tied to children like Timothy. 8-year-olds who never cried, who never played, who watched. They show up in places that matter, during war, famine, economic collapse, as if drawn to weakness or sent to study it. And every time they vanish, something changes. A town goes silent, a church is shuttered, a body is buried without a name. You weren't meant to know this. But now you do. And if you've followed this far, then I want you to write this phrase in the comments. The eyes were too old. Twice. Once for yourself. Once for the others like you. You're no longer just a viewer, you're a witness. The descent is nearly complete. You've seen the pattern. But there is one last truth, one final fracture in the veil. And once I show you, you will never sleep the same again. One year after Timothy vanished, Dr. Harding received a parcel. No return address, no postage, just string, wax, and his name, written in a child's hand. Inside, a journal, not his. It was smaller, bound in black leather. The pages were written in Latin, Greek, and a language he couldn't identify. But one passage, carefully translated, was underlined in red. A perfected observer must neither intervene nor empathize. The organism must feel watched, but never comforted. It was signed, T.C. August 3rd, 1868. The same day Harding's dog died. The same day his neighbor's son went missing. The same day he heard scratching at the cellar door that didn't exist. He left Sedalia 3 days later. But the pattern followed. Timothy Caldwell, or whatever he truly was not unique. He was a fragment, a prototype, a mirror turned inward. Because what terrified Harding most wasn't that Timothy had no emotion. It was that he was learning to fake it. Better, sharper, cleaner. And somewhere, in a quiet town, maybe not far from you, there's another child with pale eyes and polite silence, waiting, watching, practicing. What you've just heard is dangerous. Because it means some children are born without souls, but with purpose. The past didn't bury them. It trained them. You're not crazy for feeling it. You quote, "We're not wrong for sensing the lie in normalcy. You're just awake now. And that can't be undone. Welcome to the shadows. They've been expecting you."